Okay, so we will have totally different talk now. First question, how many of you know what neuron in the brain is? Do anyone remember something from high school biology still? Yeah, perfect. Okay. And on the picture, I have 3 neurons. So you can think about this like that. On the bottom, you see my mouse? You see my mouse. Perfect. On the bottom, you get your input. This is usually electrical signal in the brain. Then this triangle here, a cell body, translated to digital signal called action potentials or spike. And this is further propagated through the branching out further to other neurons that are connecting in the next step. So you immediately can feel that there's a lot of analogy to artificial neuronal networks, which basically takes the inputs, process it, which is just a simple ReLU activation function right now, and move it forward. So the field of neuroscience very long been involved in producing the ideas of how to produce this algorithm and testing them. And today I will talk you a little bit more about what was done, at what level we were thinking about these ideas, and what is possible today. Because today it's much more possible. The AI winter was in AI, but also was in neuroscience. And today we have fascinating technology that basically enable us to be more inspired and translate neuroscience to AI much more deeply than before. Okay, so let's just have a very broad discussion about what does it mean to be brain inspired, right? Because at some point, it is a very useful and sexy metaphor to everyone. It sells well. So you feel, you see a lot of startups saying, we are brain inspired, right? And what does it really mean? Can you really be brain inspired if you are building AI or artificial neural networks? Some people will agree with that, right? And the field of AI borrowed a lot of terminology from neuroscience. So the attention, emotion, reasoning, intelligence, plasticity, these are all neuroscience terminology that in AI is adopted in sometimes somehow different way than neuroscience textbook would say. It's still useful. Then we have spiking neuronal networks, very alternative approach to AI. They have already some use, and right now, I think they perform better of neuromorphic chips just because the hardware is the bottleneck here. These kind of networks just do not work super well yet on a typical GPU. So you need an alternative hardware approach too. This is a little bit more similar to what brain is doing because we have both the wetware in the brain and the neuronal code embedded in one space. And this is a lot why the brain can be so efficient. You don't waste the time for processing memory and sending it to the GPU. You have all in one place, right? And then you have neuromorphic chips field, which is having a huge revolution right now. And the amount of companies building neuromorphic chips in the last year popping out of stealth is just incredible. These are basically engineers who say, oh, the brain runs much faster and much more energy efficient. Why if we could move it into the level of the hardware? So their hardware is inspired by some of the neuroscience rules. And why a lot of this, what I just said, are like very at the metaphor aspirational level of inspiration. Today, we could be much more further into the mechanistic and engineering path. And this is ultimately what can bring us more breakthroughs in both neuroscience and AI. So the biggest trap I would like to show you is when someone claims the famous fact, it's a fact that brain runs on 20 watts. Yes, it is true, but it's somehow misleading as a design target. To me personally, if I hear that, this means that the current engineering team have no idea what they are building. And why? People usually use it to compare it with the AI models, how much their energy use. And there's a real problem here. Current AI is unsustainable and hits energy wall. It's not only will be expensive, but it can cause another AI winter because everyone uses a lot of agent and a lot of tokens. And we, even in the United States, don't have electrical energy that can sustain this problem. Building more data center is a decade-long problem. And last week, Bloomberg showed that half of the data center planned to be built in the United States just got canceled because we don't have enough transformers, a very basic electric circuit. So we need a new paradigm and we need to build something that is more energy efficient. And I would like also to share with you some more update about the 20 watts terminology. There were newer studies. The 20 watts were calculated in 50s. Since then, also there was a lot of science related to how much really energy the brain uses. And in one of the newest papers, people said that actually the computation in the brain, the cortex, is just 0.2 watts. And this is related to spikes being sent through the networks, the digital signal. Then 4 to 5 watts is for communication. So all the connectivity in our brain, how the neurons are connected. And let's say another 6 watts is housekeeping. We have the current, it is depleting, it is sending the information. The neurons need to make more housekeeping and maintenance behavior to be able to fire another action potential and sustain the system. And in comparison to the previous 20 watt studies, it was shown that about 9 watts is just lost as heat, and it was a measurement mistake, just because the technique was not detailed enough. So you can see that it's not 20 watts, it's about 10 if you count everything, what you need to sustain the system. So it's still a very valid point of reference. I would invite everyone to dig into the papers and actually get more inspiration how this is done, not only that this is this number, right? The number is not useful at all. So let's reverse the strategy, right? So how many of you have seen this quote from Sam Altman recently, when he compared that actually people also use energy. You need 20 years of life to train your brain as an adult, right? And he compared here basically the food cost for 20 years, which means calorie content burned by the brain, which is exactly how the famous 20 watt estimation was done for the human brain. You could add more to that there is school cost for 20 years. There's all kinds of experiences our brain is learning, and also billions years of evolution, because our brain evolved from different organisms, right? So if you count this, yes, then the brain is like super expensive. So any reactions? Who heard this Sam Altman quote in the audience? Okay, so I will tell you, there was a huge public outrage. A lot of that was just because people don't like when you say that humans are worse than AI, right? Of course. But there were some Reddit comments saying, yeah, I burn like 2,000 calories today by doing nothing, right? And it's true. This is comparing caloric context, and the common parts between the 20 watts and what Sam Altman said is that you are comparing caloric burn as energy measure, and you brush off somehow how this is done and why, right? So it's very useful to use this kind of analogies if you want to approach investors, right? 20 watts, good enough. Who need more, right? But I want to invite everyone here to be more skeptical and dig deeper, because actually we can do better. Maybe it's good enough, but it can be better. So what actually produces efficiency in the brain is a little bit like sparse and structured connectivity. We know that AI transformer architecture are like based on all-to-all connectivity and near zero weights. The real brain is sparse and structured. We have much more dynamics and content-dependent signal propagation. So depending what kind of stimuli you are processing, it's a different route. Of course, we have more than one type of neuron in the brain. There's about 150 of those, and you can make different use of them. And they're largely parallel independent system. So while your hearing is processing what I'm talking to right now, your visual system is processing the slides. And these are two independent systems which talk to each other, but you can treat them completely independently. So each of these cases is backed by years of neuroscience data. And in this context, when I'm only talking it to you, it's very simplified, right? I need to be able to communicate to you these ideas. So I need to simplify. But in real neuroscientific lab, we have plenty of data to back up each of those in different contexts. And this is what I would like to pay your attention. If someone is telling we are brain inspired, I will ask them how and where's your data? Because this is what can be done. Okay, so two successful companies that are building in this space, which are very neuroscience inspired, and they have a lot of data, even if maybe it's not the newest technology, but they prove that it is already very useful to dig up deeper. So this Liquid AI, it's a Can AI. They have different models for AI, and I really encourage you to check them out. These are fascinating types of how you could steer the signal propagation to be still intelligent, but much smaller, much more energy efficient. And what I want to show you today is basically how much the technology in neuroscience progressed and what we can do. So let's address this schema today. About few decades ago, we could only see that they are different puzzles. Let's imagine we're playing Tetris, but we don't know how Tetris works, right? You just see the game and let's say 30, 40 years ago, we only could see that they are like different bars and we don't know if this is a T-shape, if this is even like one motif, it is a one brick or these are two independent bricks. We could observe single of these motifs independently, right? Then together with the huge progresses in the genetics discovery, we could start seeing colors that actually these different building blocks get different colors. So this could be a bar, but it's green, and this is a bar, but it's blue. So are they really doing the same thing or not, right? But you have much more information. And today, neuroscience enables you to go large scale and low resolution enough to start observing connectivity motifs at scale, which means that you observe that red L-shaped brick is always coming with the green ones, and the pink one is always associated with the yellow one, but it's never coming to work together with the blue. And how do you compare that? Let's think if you have transformer architecture and you don't know how it's working, right? This is what a typical question for AI interpretability, and you try to reverse engineer it, right? This is what's the problem for neuroscience. We have a neuronal circuit. We try to guess how it works by different, like approaching, bugging the system in a different places, right? So if you would have that and you only would see one neuronal node at the time, you will never guess how it's working. If you only see one attention stream at the time, good luck with that, right? And you don't know even that back propagation works or that it exists. You have no idea about learning rules. So being able to plot in the transformer architecture, even the connectivity weights, right? How connectivity weights converging from one node to the other, what's the distribution, is very informative about how these things works. And we are basically entering that era in neuroscience. We are starting being able to see how the whole system works at single node resolution and getting maps of how everything is connected. So all this previous image was basically to show you a little bit abstractive way. Here, for those who are interested, I listed a few core techniques we use in neuroscience. I'm not going to explain them. It's too short talk for that. But you could, if you are curious, you can Google them. And the one problem with those techniques was that we needed to choose. We have scale or resolution, and we are limited by experimental time, right? An animal in biological lab, we cannot spend millions of years to record from it. We have about 1 hour to 3 hours, depending on the technique. Depending if the animal is tested when it's actively processing or when it's just a tissue from this animal brain. So there are huge limitations in neuroscience space to overcome, but we have did that, and I will show you. So about 10 years ago, what we could do to look at the single neuronal connectivity, so analogs of one node in AI talking to another node in AI, was to put small electrodes on two neurons. So one would be used to stimulate one neuron, and if the neurons are connected, you, with the other electrode, could record the synaptic weights, so analog of connections on weights in the AI node, right? The problem with that, you could only do that for one neuron at a time, so it was not useful at all. And by this, we still could discover different connectivity motifs, but one at a time. So you are like totally blind in what's going on in the broader circuit. With the appearance of optogenetics, which is a fascinating technology, it enables you to put special ion channels that make neuron light sensitive. So now you can tell neurons, now you speak, now you speak, now you speak. And you can, in a closed loop system, say which neurons should be active. And because of that, you can test many more of those. So in the first mapping studies of this kind, we were putting just one of these electrodes on one neuron, which we want to read connections to. And we would go sequentially with the light. A technique called holographic optogenetics or holography, which is similar to sometimes you have these shows when you display holograms of people. This runs similar way, analogic, just on much smaller scale. So our holograms is a ball of light shaped in a way to cover neuronal body. This gives you this possibility to activate neuron at very specific resolution. And you can go from neuron to neuron, from one to the other, and let's say test 10 to hundreds of candidates in the neurons who is connected, right? Because also in the brain, you actually don't have a nice layers architecture like the AI provides. You need to figure out first who is on which layer. And these techniques gave us approximate 3% view of the local circuit, right? We know that in an even small field of view in neuron, under the microscope, you have thousands of neurons. So if you only can test 10 to 100, it's improvement, but it's still like 3%, not super useful. And then recently we were able in neuroscience to scale the technique to actually, within few minutes, have the coverage of about 30% of that circuit. And this is already further scaled. In specific cases, you can go even to uncover to test 100% of neurons in your field of view. And the trick there is basically that we combined the AI, the deep learning algorithms, with these scaled out optogenetics stimulations, when now we stimulate several neurons at a time, so usually 10 to 20 neurons, and then the deep learning algorithm just helps us to decipher who is connected from this group and who is not connected, right? And this gives us this possibility to not only observe neurons at scale, but to keep the single neuron resolution, and even single spike resolution. Because one neuron can send you 2 spikes, 3 spikes to your postsynaptic cell, or just one. And that's actually very important. Okay, so how this translates to AI? So this is the experiments we started doing in neuroscience. You have an animal who is looking at different images. It's done in visual cortex. So you are basically translating the different images to simulations of your L-1 layer, right? I mentioned before, it's not obvious in neuroscience which neurons which layer, but for simplicity, for the purpose of this talk, if you imagine that cortex is a artificial neuronal network-like thing, and you want to know who is connected to this one node, you can now stimulate all the different configurations of neurons in your L-1 layer and get the distribution of weights converging to that one neuron. And you can repeat that many times, right? So this is a direct analogy that shows you how both the sparsity and what is the structure of the neuronal circuit. And by the way, how many of you knows how this works in a transformer? What's the distribution of weights converging of one neuron? Any guesses? It's Gaussian. It needs Gaussian. It's not useful for anything. And a spoiler alert, in nature, it's not Gaussian. So this is already one feature we can translate and build on it. And this is a little bit of teaser how this looks in practice, because it's always nice to know how things are done. So to do these kind of experiments, you need to build a microscope that is the size of more or less from the window to this door to the first row. And then you need another space for all the hardware, software communication equipment. But more or less, this looks like in this picture. You have a lot of different lenses and mirrors that basically steers the laser beam to be able to target neurons at this single neuronal scale. Then, this is a typical field of view under the microscope, just like one layer. And the green neurons here are those which it's a one type of neurons which we use genetic modification to just put a green color there, so we can see what type of neurons is there. The one electrode from the previous picture is basically here, this green bar. There also is a green dye there, so we can perfuse the neuron of interest and then recreate its architecture. And the neurons we stimulate are the red blobs, right? So these are neurons which nucleus have a special red dye that marks it, so we can see it under the microscope. And now we can use a very fast algorithm that just looks where are the red blobs. That's very useful because it does it under 1 minute. And these are our targets, which we later stimulate with the laser, with this optogenetical technique. And we can learn what are the synaptic weights converging on that one single neuron in that case, right? So I will show you actually how the synaptic weights, which now are analogous to the connectivity for this one neuron looks, and you can appreciate how fast it is. So each of these small spikes, if a group of neurons that are connected to this one neuron, and we can very quickly discover what's the connectivity, right? So, okay, great. We have one architectural feature of how energy efficient intelligence should be built, right? And I hope it's very clear analogy for you now how the interpretability word talk to biological circuits. That's basically an analog stuff. And we want to build more. In the case of neuroscience, we have more than one type of neurons. You could try to play with AI balance, with how different types of neurons, the negative weights and the positive weights, how it's shaped, and basically discover how Mother Nature connected the dots. Okay, and why we should care, why this is useful. Brain is energy efficient. Everything which is built on top of neurons is by definition energy efficient. And if you can show any intelligent behavior there, this means that this is the right place to go. You can connect the dots in many different ways. You don't know if it's not losing energy, efficiency, or intelligence, but reading from the brain puts us immediately in the right corner of the space of all possible ideas, right? This is why it's useful, because we can start coming from lose inspiration, I have idea, to I have idea and I have mechanism. Okay, so what I want to show to you that essentially now neuroscience can be an AI R&D tool and not a muse anymore. And we are not longer asking question, can neuroscience inspire AI, but how fast we can extract these recipes. And I would like to invite everyone to read the QR code. It works better on desktop, but you can play later. This is our Synaptics game when we show the problem. So you have very small artificial neuronal network that is connected. And now you can, with that game, remove connections and add connections and change their weights. And you can play, and you have these two bars. And the task is maximize efficiency and keep the intelligence still high, right? So if you will play, of course, you will be disappointed because the game runs like that. It's a little bit inspired by how the AI works today. You are losing your intelligence the moment you start pruning too much, right? And that's the problem. And here is a little bit shout out for Neurofica. It's the company we're building. It's a Neuro-inspired AI solutions to improve energy efficiency. So how we do it, besides some features we are trying to implement in our inference algorithm, we are basically building a biological platform, biological computer, real neuronal cells integrated with a chip that can show already intelligent behavior. This kind of computing already plays some games like Doom recently. And we are going to train AI. Our game will be train AI model. And these biological computers can do it for fraction of energy. Our North Star is to build biological data centers and solve the problem of energy inefficiency in AI that way. On the way there, we are extracting mechanistic and measured patterns of how Mother Nature implements intelligent and energy efficient behavior. So we will be able to build energy efficient inference models. And the lower hanging fruit, we want to use neuronal activity produced at scale from that biological computer as a language to improve accuracy and robustness of current AI models. And I would like to follow everyone what we do. We are looking for collaborations. We are actually asking one question: how should we package our products so people would like to use them in a very simple way? We are translating Mother Nature to neuroscience, running both like neurons and on neurons using biological computer. And yeah, I'm happy to take any questions.